Letters to Lisa, Recording 5, Compilation 2, The Fishing Trip. Well, these letters arrived in the most bizarre packaging. In fact, it's rather strange how these reached me. I was walking Dougal along the beach, intent on getting back in time for EastEnders, when he wandered up to me with a crusted water bottle in his mouth. He's not the best at fetch, and I thought he'd picked it up instead of his ball, as he does. However, inside it was this letter, sodden and faded in places, but clearly a letter. Dear Lisa, if this letter happens to reach you, I will definitely be surprised. I understand that I haven't used the most conventional or logistical means of sending mail. It was something of a last resort, a stab in the dark, a final attempt to make contact with you. This may very well be my last chance, and at the time of writing this letter, I don't really know how much time I have left. Best case scenario, by the time you read this letter, I will have been rescued, and we'll both be able to piece together what has happened. Worst case scenario, as tough as it is to think about, I must face the reality that I might not make it through my current predicament. But if you receive this letter, then at least someone will know what really happened. My ordeal began early this morning, the 1st of March in 1990 to be exact. It was a beautiful morning, with the golden sun beaming from clear blue skies. Today was the day of our first family fishing trip, which had been planned many weeks in advance by my fishing and marine enthusiastic parents. My younger brother Caspian and I never had much of an interest in fishing or any other of the numerous sea-related endeavours our parents were so consumed with, and had never joined them on their boat trips, except for when we were very little. But with me all set to leave for university this year, my parents were adamant that we take an all-day fishing trip as a family. Admittedly, I wasn't particularly excited about the idea of floating about on a boat for an entire day. I get motion sickness in the back of a car, for goodness sake, so I could only imagine how queasy I might feel out at sea. Regardless, I thought some family bonding time seemed like a nice idea, especially as I wouldn't be seeing them for a while. Come September. My parents, Caspian and I, were all sat in the boat, having commenced our expedition. We were sailing swiftly through the vibrant blue seas, the engine leaving a frothy trail of bubbles behind us. My father had taken the responsibility of steering, my mother was sorting out the fishing equipment, and Caspian was fully engrossed in his Game Boy, which he had apparently been allowed to take on board. As for me, well, I had been taking in my surroundings, enjoying the cool breeze against my face and admiring the glistening water surface as it was illuminated by the sunshine. It was all very atmospheric. I watched as the shore became smaller and smaller the further we sailed away from it, although in the last minute or two I unfortunately felt my first wave of nausea. "When are we stopping? I feel seasick," I mumbled. My mother shot me a concerned look and reassured me that we were just now reaching our first destination, at which my parents were hoping to catch some sort of rare eel. She rummaged through one of the bags and retrieved a small pot with a white lid, throwing it my way. "Take one of those, Kaya. You'll feel better in no time," she told me. I thanked her and swallowed one immediately, hoping it'd take effect sooner rather than later. The thundering roars of the engine began to fade into a low rumble as our boat started slowing down. "All right, gang, we're here," my father exclaimed in excitement, a joyous grin plastered on his face. He released the steering wheel as our boat had come to a stop, before sifting through the equipment and chatting with my mother. I stood up to give my legs a well-deserved stretch, and upon doing a quick scan of our location, I realized that I couldn't see land in any direction. It was rather unsettling, being out here in this vast open space of blue with no land in sight, no solid ground for what looked like miles. My mother told Caspian to turn off his Game Boy and take part in the family activities, and he rolled his eyes. I looked at my father, who now had a tiny live fish wiggling about in his hands, which he pierced through its jaw with a shiny metal hook. I was hit with another wave of nausea, feeling ever so sorry for the poor helpless fish. Apparently noticing my reaction, my father told me that the eel we were hoping to catch was best lured in with live bait. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't the type of person who could stomach a fishing trip and probably wouldn't be returning for another anytime soon. I turned away to look out at the sea, trying to make the most of being with nature. That was until I noticed a dark shadow and a slight lump underneath the water's surface, a few meters away from our boat. It looked like there was something floating just below the surface, but not quite high enough to break through. I frowned in confusion as I continued to observe. To my surprise, the shadow began to slowly make its way towards our boat, gliding seamlessly through the water. As it approached, I saw it finally break the surface of the water. At first, it looked something like a black bowling ball, but as it continued to ascend, I was able to get a better look, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It seemed to be a giant fish-like creature emerging its head from the water, but like no fish I had ever seen before. It was completely jet black in colour, its glossy scales shimmering as they reflected the light. The head alone was slightly bigger than a human's head, so one could only imagine how much bigger the body was underneath the water. It had two triangular fins perched on either side of its head, positioned much like the ears of a cat. Its gills were on either side of its face, like deep lacerations that inflated and deflated with each breath. Most notably, it was the face that truly haunted me. It had a wide, gaping mouth curved downwards at each side, as if forming an upside-down smile, with a row of pointy fangs on its lower jaw and a prominent underbite. The eyes were as large as tennis balls, bulging out of its head, but they weren't anything like fish's eyes at all. They were located not on either side of its head, like with an ordinary fish, but right next to each other, at the front of the face. The eyes didn't have that vacant, glazed-over look to them, but instead seemed to be looking straight at our boat with purpose, as if it could very much see us. The eyes were a pure bright white, and the pupils were small black dots in the centre, with a ring of icy blue circling them. I felt as though I was witnessing something straight from a nightmare. I had never seen anything like this in my life. Before I had a chance to gather my thoughts or alert my family, the fish made a beeline for our boat. It gained speed at an alarming rate, its head still raised above the water, staring right at us. It cut through the water effortlessly, seeming to defy the notion of how a fish might usually swim. I cried out to my family, pointing at this terrifying sea creature. They all turned towards me, and when they saw the fish, their expressions simultaneously switched to one of apprehension. "What on earth?" my father muttered under his breath, his eyes widening. Caspian looked visibly frightened and asked our parents if they had heard of this type of fish before. They both responded by shaking their heads, never taking their eyes from it. As the fish drifted even closer, my mother screamed for me and my brother to stand behind her and ordered my father to steer us away and create some distance between us. As he proceeded to do so, the fish grinded to a halt in the water about 2 meters from our boat. It was unnervingly still, except for some slight bobbing motions as it floated in the sea. Caspian and I exchanged a look of worry as my heart thudded in my chest. My father was rushing to get the engine started, but stopped when we all saw my mother slowly approaching the railing of the boat, getting as close to the fish as possible. She didn't seem to have a shred of fear anymore, only a strange blank look on her face. Her and the fish were locked in an intense standoff of eye contact. The silence was deafening. "What's going into you?" my father said quietly through gritted teeth. If my mother's actions weren't bizarre enough by this point, what she did next had us all in shock. Without breaking eye contact with the fish, she grabbed the boat railings and swung each leg over them one by one before slowly lowering her entire body into the sea, all while staring at the fish. All three of us shouted in disbelief, rushing to the railing and extending our arms out to her, encouraging her to grab on and get back in the boat. However, she wasn't even facing us. Now, much like the fish, only her head was visible above the water, and she instantly began to swim straight towards the fish in silence. "What are you doing? You're going to get yourself killed!" my father bellowed at the top of his lungs, his face pale and full of anguish. Caspian and I continued to scream, begging her to come back to us. All the while, the fish hadn't moved an inch and remained staring right at my mother. Now, mere inches away from the fish, we began to panic even more. I couldn't believe this was happening. Both my parents were extremely passionate about anything relating to the sea, fish and sea creatures, but this was completely out of character. My mother was now face to face with the fish, and they both floated in the water in silence for a few moments. Then they both descended slowly underwater without creating so much as a wave or bubble in the water. At this point, both my brother and I were in floods of tears. My father called out my mother's name in desperation and flung himself over the edge, making a mighty splash in the water. "Dad!" I screamed. "I'm going to save her! Just stay there! Just stay there, kids! I'll be back!" he shouted to us from the water as he hurriedly swam to where they had both submerged. Once he reached that point, I saw him take a deep breath and then dive underwater. Caspian and I were both clutching the railing, tears streaming down our faces, and hoping to see our parents resurface unharmed. 1 minute went by, then another, then several. I felt like I had completely lost my mind and imagined the last 10 minutes of my life having suffered from some kind of seasickness-induced hallucination. I didn't understand how this could have happened. I looked at my brother, who turned to me distraught. "Kaya, they're gone," he said. I felt my knees go weak as my head grew heavy. My vision became blurry, and I fell to the floor of the boat, my consciousness quickly fading before it all went dark. When I awoke, I could see a greyish-blue sky above me, and I felt the floor of the boat at the back of my head. The horrific memories came flooding back, and I shot upright, frantically looking around for my brother. He was sat in the driver's seat, holding a map. He looked up at me and sighed in relief. "Oh, thank God. You were passed out for ages." I looked around. "Did Mum or Dad?" I asked softly, trailing off. Caspian shook his head sadly. I felt as though I had been punched in the stomach. I sat down next to him as we tried to make sense of our situation, with me suggesting that we try our best to sail back home. He told me that he'd already tried that whilst I was passed out. Apparently, he'd gotten the engine to work and sailed us in the direction he thought was home, according to the map, but it had run out of fuel, and we were still in a position where we couldn't see any land whatsoever. The grim reality of our situation was really beginning to dawn on me, and I tried my best to keep myself together. Doesn't Aunt Kelly know we went out fishing today? We're supposed to be at her place for dinner this evening. When we don't show up, she'll realise something's happened and have a sea rescue team sent out before dark, right?" I said. Caspian exhaled and shrugged, gazing up at the sky. "Probably not before dark. The sun looks like it's going to set pretty soon." The idea of being trapped out here in an endless sea of deep waters without the comfort of sunlight terrified me. Not to mention, what about our poor parents? My eyes brimmed with tears. I couldn't wrap my head around the idea of them being gone. I refused to believe it. Maybe being in denial was the only way for me to keep a level head and find a way out of this bleak situation. "Caspian, let's search the boat properly. There must be something around here in case of emergencies. A flare or something," I suggested. He nodded, and we both proceeded to search either end of the boat, rifling through our parents' bags. I noticed a small compartment below deck, discovering a yellow plastic container after opening it up. Inside were 2 red cylindrical objects, and I felt a glimmer of hope. "Found some!" I exclaimed. "Help me figure this out." I examined one of the flares, trying to read the instructions carefully. This might have been our only chance of rescue. After no response from my brother, I called him once again, slightly annoyed this time at his apparent lack of urgency. But once I raised my head to look at him, I could see he was stood by the edge of the boat against the railing, looking out to sea, utterly still. Confused and worried, I asked what was wrong, but when I looked at his view, I was immediately provided with the answer. A few meters away from our boat was the same fish-like creature. It was staring at Caspian with its scary, bulging eyes. The flare fell from my hands as I was overcome with fear. Caspian, I whispered, grabbing his upper arm to pull him away from the edge. He wouldn't budge. His feet planted firmly into the boat floor. Mortified, I looked over at him and saw his face, which displayed that same blank expression that my mother had before. Before I could even formulate my next move, Caspian had grabbed the railing and launched himself over the edge, plunging into the sea. I screamed, watching helplessly as his head re-emerged from the water, still staring at the fish. Just as my mother had done, he started swimming towards it, ignoring my pleas for him to return to the boat. He was soon face to face with the fish and stopped swimming as they continued to stare at each other. Then both Caspian and the fish slowly submerged peacefully underwater, barely disturbing the water's surface. I had never felt fear like this before in my life. It was a unique kind of fear, a blend of terror, disbelief, confusion, sorrow and pain. I was now all alone on the boat, my entire family having left me because of this creature. I still didn't understand it one bit. I looked up at the sky, which was now a purplish colour, the sun in the process of setting behind wisps of clouds. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I found myself booting into survival mode. If I really sat down and started to contemplate what had happened, I'd surely become an emotional wreck, which wouldn't help my situation. I snatched the flare from the floor where I'd dropped it, aiming it high into the sky before setting it off. It made a resounding bang as a bright red light came shooting from the flare, soaring into the clouds like a blazing red firework. I watched as the light burned radiantly in the sky, hoping that it would be seen and someone somewhere would be on their way to my rescue. I shut my eyes and sighed, allowing myself to fall into a seat on the boat. However, when I opened them and looked out into the sea, my heart stopped. There was the fish again, floating eerily a few meters away from the boat, taunting me with its sinister eyes and threatening fangs. The fish that had taken my whole family away. Strangely enough, I wasn't frightened this time. Perhaps I'd reached my fear capacity today. Instead, I felt myself brimming with rage, pure, unfiltered anger at this horrible creature. I stood upright, glaring at the fish. I knew I had to rid the world of this evil creature once and for all, stopping this from ever happening again. I raced to the compartment below deck, opening the yellow plastic container to retrieve the last remaining flare. I then went to the edge of the boat and pointed it directly at the fish's face. The fish continued to stare at me menacingly, apparently unfazed. Just as I was about to set it off, something completely unexplainable happened to me. I was suddenly overcome with a sense of dread. I released the flare from my grip and it fell into the water. I was astonished. My hand seemed to have moved entirely independently. I went to turn my head to look into the water where the flare had dropped, but much to my dismay, my head wouldn't budge. I tried moving my arms, my legs. I was completely paralyzed from head to toe. I screamed in my head, trying my best to make some kind of movement, but I could only stand completely still and keep staring at the fish. Although I didn't stay still for very long, on their own, my arms suddenly reached out in front of me, holding the railing of the boat, and my legs began to swing their way over. I could see where this was going, but was unable to stop myself. I was clearly being mind-controlled by this creature. I plummeted into the sea, feeling the horrible freezing cold water. It was so cold. I was surprised I hadn't immediately passed out from shock. I must have been underwater for a split second before I resurfaced, still locked eyes with the fish. I felt myself starting to swim towards it. Within a few seconds, I was face to face with it and had stopped swimming, treading in water. It was absolutely horrendous up close. Its jagged teeth looked sharp enough to cut through anything. The eyes were still undoubtedly the worst of all. Suddenly, we both simultaneously submerged under water. This is it, I thought. I'm going to drown. Everything was blurry, as I was now completely underwater, the seawater burning my eyes. Then something touched my left hand, and after that the most peculiar thing began to happen. First of all, I was able to breathe properly, despite being underwater. Weirdly enough, my breathing didn't feel like it was happening through my nose or mouth. I was just inexplicably able to breathe somehow. The next odd thing I noticed was that my vision instantly cleared up, and I could see perfectly underwater, as if my eyes were designed just for it. I couldn't see much in front of me, though, just the far-reaching deep blue sea and a few small fish darting around, but it was undoubtedly a huge difference. I looked over to my left side. I could see the fish, the first time seeing it in its entirety, and not just a floating head. It was about 6 foot from head to tail, completely jet black, with a swishing tail and 2 large fins on either side of its body. Its right fin was touching my hand, as if to hold hands with me. There was also a dim blue glow at the point where the fin and my hand made contact, but as I continued to look, I was horrified to see that my hand looked like it was fusing with the fin, my fingers melting into the scales as my hand was being absorbed. I couldn't believe it. It was as if the fish and I were literally merging together, becoming one creature. I looked down toward the bottom of the sea, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. On the seabed was a whole society of intelligent life. Enormous buildings and structures made from rocks and ocean plants, with clear pathways dividing them, and sectioned off areas designated for various activities. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How could this be? The creatures occupying this civilization all looked very similar to the blackfish. They were of a similar size and had virtually the same bodies, swimming about using their tails. But, believe it or not, they all had human arms with human hands on the end instead of fins. Not only that, but their heads and faces were a horrifying hybrid of fish and human. It was almost too abhorrent to describe. Each creature had gills on either side of its face and a gaping mouth with spiky fangs and an underbite. But aside from that, the faces were essentially human. Human skin, human hair, human nose, cheeks, eyes. Each creature had very unique human characteristics, and they all looked very different from one another. Different human skin colours, different hair types and colours, different human facial structures and eyes. There was no doubt that these creatures were highly intelligent beings, conversing and interacting with each other, entering and exiting buildings and using their human hands to pick sea plants from the seabed. There must have been thousands of them. I'd never seen something so extraordinary. It was all too much to process. I turned to look upwards where the water's surface would be, seeing something arguably even more bizarre. In an enormous tight-knit swarm were hundreds of black fish, just like the one next to me, with no human arms or characteristics. They all floated in the water disturbingly together in what looked like some kind of creepy army. Every single one had its face angled straight upwards, staring intensely at the surface of the water in anticipation, as if waiting patiently for their prey. It was an image so chilling that it would surely haunt me for the rest of my life. Looking over to my left hand again, I realized it was nowhere to be seen, as the fusion process had now progressed about halfway up my forearm. It wouldn't be long before the merge was complete, and I became one of those ghastly creatures below. As I accepted my fate, I then felt a powerful blow from the other side of me, sending me crashing through the water. What on earth was going on, I thought. My head was spinning and my vision became blurred again. I could barely make out anything in front of me. I quickly realized that I had now lost my ability to breathe underwater. At that moment, I suddenly felt another creature swim beneath me, and before I knew what was going on, the creature began to swim upwards at great speed, lifting me up with it as it ascended. I was propelled upwards through the water until I burst through the surface, feeling the cold air on my face. I gratefully took a deep breath of oxygen, and the creature flung me up into the air with strength. I was in the air for a brief second before I fell and hit a hard surface, falling on my side. I lay there for a moment, coughing water from my lungs. I opened my stinging eyes to see a familiar sight. I was back on my parents' boat. I raised both of my hands in front of my face, stunned. To my surprise and relief, my left hand and arm were still intact, unscathed from merging with the fin. I moved them around, pleased to discover that I had retained normal function of my hand and arm. What had happened now? Why was I back in the boat, I thought. I stood up, my clothes drenched with water. I looked over the edge at where I had been thrown from and was in complete bewilderment. There, in the sea, was a small whale no larger than about 2 meters long. Poking its friendly face out of the water, I couldn't help but smile. "You saved me, didn't you?" I said in awe of the lovely creature. I reached over to the side of the boat, extending my arm downwards to it. "Thank you," I said sincerely. The whale nudged my hand slightly with its head in acknowledgement. It seemed to have some kind of understanding of me, perhaps another intelligent being somehow. That was the moment when I had the idea to write this letter to you, Lisa. With no flares left to use, writing a letter seemed to be the only method of communication available to me. After being saved by a whale who seems to understand me and is actively rooting for me, I've gotten a crazy idea that it might be able to get my letter where it needs to be. Far-fetched and probably futile, I know, but after all that's happened today, I would say anything is possible. So I tore some pages from my father's notepad, which I found in his bag, using his pen to write 2 letters. I've already written 1 brief letter for anyone on land who might be able to find it and come to my rescue, and this one is for you, Lisa. I excluded all mentions of the horrible fishes in the former letter, fearing a reader might think it was a fabricated story or joke, and not take it seriously enough to come looking for me. But I have a feeling that you might have some answers for me, Lisa, or at the very least, some perspective or insight. I plan to roll the letters up into scrolls and place each in an empty water bottle and drop them into the water by the whale. I'll then inform it of the intended destinations of each letter and hope for the best. It's almost dark now, and I'm unbelievably cold. My wet clothes surely aren't helping. I found a blanket in one of the bags, and I have enough water and food to last me perhaps 1 day more. I miss my poor family and wish they'd return to me, but even if that happened, I fear they wouldn't be themselves. Stolen by a horrible species of fish intent on luring humans into the water to steal their limbs in an attempt to upgrade themselves. Someone has to put a stop to this. I just pray that my letters are received in good time. From Kaya. Well, these stories never seem to stop shocking me. Oh, I hope Kaya got out of this okay. At least the friendly whale was helpful. I hope she found others who could help her. Her poor family. Certainly won't be walking on the beach for some time after this. That was Letters to Lisa, Recording 5, Compilation 2, The Fishing Trip. Written by Yianina Small. Read by Caroline Lawrie.